Well, good afternoon. My name's William Bourke. I'm the President of Sustainable Australia Political Party. Today we're, as always, a very open political party, welcoming people to our meetings and making sure that a broad community better understands who we are. Our objectives are, of course, for an economically, environmentally and socially sustainable Australia. Today we have a number of people who've stayed on beyond our AGM today, who've come to attend this guest panel. So I've already welcomed our members who've been here. I want to welcome all of our non-members and our special guests, in particular the Honourable Kelvin Thomson, as well as Leith van Onselen. We also have a distinguished guest from America, Sam Hopkins and wife Genia. So thank you to everyone for attending today. First of all, we're going to hear from Leith van Onselen, as you can see from the screen behind me. Leith writes as the unconventional economist on macro business. He's an economist and has previously worked at the Australian Treasury, Victorian Treasury and Goldman Sachs. Leith is one of the few economists to question our rapid population growth and accounting for aggregate GDP as opposed to looking at the per capita GDP to better measure our well-being. And Leith today is here to discuss the economic impacts of our elevated immigration intake. Please welcome Leith.
Thanks very much, William. Now, I've got quite a bit of content to get through today, about 30 slides, lots of charts, all that sort of thing. So I'll go through them fairly quickly. And if you've got any questions, if you could please save those till the end. Now, first of all, I want to start off with a bit of a state of play of where Australia's at. Now, it's stating the bleeding obvious that we're an immigrant nation. Over the past 70 years, immigration's boosted up our overall population by about 7 million people. And immigration is effectively Australia's de facto population policy. Now, the reason why I say that is that under a zero net migration scenario, Australia's population, according to the Productivity Commission, would peak at around 27 million. That's 3 million more than currently by about 2060. Whereas if net overseas migration is 250,000 per year, the population will rise to about 44 million. And obviously there's ranges in between there, as shown by the chart here from the Productivity Commission. Now, Australia's population over the past 12 years has surged. In the post-war period between 1946 and 2003, Australia's population rose by around 214,000 per annum. John Howard opened the floodgates in around 2003. And in the 12 years since, Australia's population has risen by about another 130,000 per year, by 343,000 per annum. And according to the Intergenerational Report, which is the government's official forecast, population is projected to grow by nearly 400,000 people over the next 35 years. Now, to put this population growth into context, I've charted here the population growth rates across the OECD, as well as the Anglosphere countries, so comparable economies. And since 2003, Australia's population has grown at about 2.5 times the OECD average. And it's by far the fastest growing in the Anglosphere. Our population has grown by 22% over that period and about 1.8% per annum. So we are going gangbusters. Australia's population has surged across all of Australia's states, well, the major states anyway. And I've just got a few charts to show you the major ones. This chart here shows the historical population growth since Federation for New South Wales. And in 1946 to 2003, New South Wales population grew by about 65,000 per annum. Past 12 years, it's shot up to just over 83,000. And according to state government forecasts, it's expected to grow by 110,000, or almost 110,000, up to 2041. Now, lovely Melbourne, where we're at the moment, used to be lovelier. It's now starting to get a little bit congested, but unfortunately it's going to get worse. Victoria is and is projected to continue to be the population growth leader. Again, the same post-war period, 1946 to 2003. Victoria's population grew by just under 50,000 per annum. The last 12 years, it's shot up to nearly 89,000. And over the next 35 years, it's projected to grow by 115,000 per year. That's well over double the post-war average. Finally, I've got Queensland. I'm only doing the big three at the moment, just for time reasons. Queensland's population, again, like the others, has shot up. The post-war period grew by just under 47,000 per annum. The past 12 years, 85,000. And of course, it's projected to grow by just over 100,000 per annum up to 2061. Now, these are all state government forecasts. So what does this mean? Well, most of us live in the big cities, and Australia is on the way to what I like to call the blind march towards megacities. Sydney's population, again, this is state government forecast, is projected to grow by just over 1.7 million over the next 20 years to 2036. That's growth in metropolitan Sydney of 87,000 per annum. And that's the equivalent of 4.5 Canberras in 20 years. If you think that's bad, just take a look at Melbourne. It's frightening. So this is a 35-year forecast because all the state governments do things differently. But over the 35 years, Melbourne's population is projected to grow by about 3.4 million. That's growth of just over 100,000 a year, so that's a packed MCG. And that's the equivalent of 9 Canberras or 2.5 Adelaides. And finally, Brisbane. Brisbane looks better, but because it's obviously starting from a smaller base. It's projected to grow by just under 1 million in 20 years. That's growth of about 50,000 per annum in Greater Brisbane. That's the equivalent of 2.5 Canberras. Now, the obvious question, well, it's obvious to us, but our politicians don't seem to look at it, is how will our cities cope? Now, this is a great graphic that the Australia Institute produced a few years ago, and it showed what some basic infrastructure Australia needs to build if we grow 400,000 people a year, which just happens to be the growth presented with the intergenerational report. So we need 61 primary schools, 2 public hospitals, and 25 residential aged care facilities. I won't worry about the housing, but we're actually doing that okay at the moment. But put up your hands if you think that Australia's built this over the last 12 years every year, and put up your hands if you think we're going to do that the next 35 years. Obviously, yeah, it's not going to happen. And then we get to the road system. Now, Infrastructure Partnerships Australia released a fantastic report about a month ago, which used Uber data to measure road network efficiency, basically congestion, over the year to March, which just happens to coincide with the latest demographic forecasts by the ABS. And it showed, surprise, surprise, that Sydney and Melbourne's congestion has gotten gotten much worse the past 12 months. Melbourne being the worst, Sydney being the second worst. Brisbane's had a bit of a decline, whereas Perth actually improved. Now, it's not rocket science to say that this correlates directly with population growth. Now, I don't have the capital city population growth. That's only released annually. It won't come out until February. But we all know that Melbourne's grown the fastest, Sydney's grown the second fastest, Queensland the third, Perth the fourth. And surprise, surprise, congestion's followed that exactly. What do you reckon's going to happen in the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? The Bureau of Infrastructure and Regional Economics recently released some congestion data across all the capital cities, which showed that the cost of congestion over the next 15 years is going to skyrocket. Again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what the cause is. And then of course we've got the housing market. Australia's housing is already amongst the most expensive in the world, with the two biggest cities leading the charge. So we've got the chart on the left shows the, at aggregate level, shows basically employee income versus the total value of residential housing. And it used to be about 3 times, it's shot up to nearly 7.5 times over the past roughly 30 years. And the median multiple, that's the median house price divided by median household disposable income, is at ridiculous levels in Sydney and slightly less ridiculous levels in Melbourne. Now, we commonly hear the thing, oh look, it's not about the population growth, we just need to build more. It's fine, we just build more infrastructure. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that. The Productivity Commission in 2013 released a report which showed that the total infrastructure spending required over the next 50 years needs to be 5 times the amount that we invested over the previous 50 years. And then in their Migrant Intake Australia report this year, the Productivity Commission also said they don't have a whole lot of confidence in the government being able to provide this infrastructure. Well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Now, there's reasons for the blowout in costs and how difficult it is to do infrastructure. It's basically because when you get down to it, Australia's big cities are already at capacity, already built out. We've got diseconomies of scale. Now, what that means is that if you want to add a railway line, you want to add a brand new road, it's a lot more difficult than it was in the past when we had greenfield land. You've effectively got to do land acquisition, you've got to do tunnelling, you've got to deal with NIMBYs, all sorts of things. So it makes providing infrastructure for a growing population and urban density and all that sort of thing extremely difficult to do and expensive. Hence, it doesn't get done. Hence, congestion goes up. Hence, housing affordability goes down. Hence, you can't get a seat on the train. Now, the population boosters will say, will generally give you 4 common arguments for mass immigration. The first one is if we didn't maintain high population growth, the economy would collapse. Now, this famous quote, which I don't think got much press coverage at the time, but I always managed to get it. A bit like a dog with a bone, that sort of thing. Malcolm Turnbull, current Prime Minister, said in 2011 that basically if we were to cut immigration, we're sentencing Australia to poverty. All right. The second common argument is that migrants lift productivity and raise residents' living standards. The third, migrants are required to alleviate skills shortages. The fourth common argument, Australia's got an ageing population, and if we don't keep Australia young, we're going to be in trouble, which then links back to point number 1. Now, I want to go through these arguments one by one and debunk them. The first one is, and this is fairly detailed, so I'll go through a couple of charts on this, a couple of slides. There's absolutely no link between immigration and prosperity. The first chart on the left shows Australia's 10-year annualised real GDP per capita. The reason why I've done that is because it gives you a nice trend. And the chart on the right compares Australia's real GDP per capita over the past 50 quarters, so that's since December 2003, with the previous 2 50 quarters. In both cases, Australia's GDP per capita, so this is once you factor in population growth, has crashed since we ramped up immigration in 2003. In fact, per capita GDP is tracking at levels not seen since the early 1980s and early 1990s recessions. So basically, high population growth has created an illusion of growth, but per capita, it's not particularly great. We always hear this argument, oh, Australia's 25 years of unbroken growth, we're awesome. Problem is, that's only when you factor in the whole economy. Now, I'm not saying Australia hasn't performed relatively well, even in per capita terms, but once you factor in population growth, we have actually had 2 negative quarters of growth over the past 25 years. One was right at the start, and the other one was in 2009, after GFC, when population growth was running super hot. Again, the blue charts, the blue bars are the aggregate GDP and red bars are per capita GDP. In any event, GDP is a very, very poor measure of living standards. It doesn't account for a whole bunch of stuff, negative externalities like traffic congestion, environmental degradation, smaller homes, more expensive homes, environmental impacts, blah, blah, blah. So what do the broader measures say? Well, the ABS likes per capita national disposable income as a good broad measure of living standards. That basically tells you how much you can, how many goods and services from the world you can buy per capita. And again, we've actually performed extremely badly since immigration's ramped up. I've used the same approach. I'm comparing the past 50 quarters to the previous two corresponding 50 quarters. And you can see that per capita national disposable income is equally as bad as it was in the 70s to 1990. Now, this is a little bit misleading because, as we all know, Australia's gone through an epic commodity price boom, and that's massively increased the terms of trade. Now, the terms of trade basically measures the price of your exports relative to your imports. So if the terms of trade goes up, your national income goes up, other things equal. And although we've had a commodity crash, the fact of the matter is, over the journey, over these 50 quarters, our terms of trade is higher than it was in the previous two. So when you factor that in, we're actually going backwards compared to the previous two periods. So what does the international data say? Well, a couple of months ago, I thought, look, I've really got to nail this. So I went to the OECD data, 35 countries, and I decided to do scatter plots and correlations and that sort of thing, regressions, on GDP per capita compared to population change, so population growth, as well as total GDP GDP per capita versus total population. And as you can see, both those charts, so there's absolutely no correlation. I probably should have marked it out a little bit better, but Australia is shown in little red dots in both of those. So there's absolutely no correlation between those two measures. What about productivity growth? Again, I've used the available OECD data, and it shows that there's, again, no correlation between labour productivity and population growth, or multi-factor productivity and population growth. And this is actually an important point. About a month ago, the Productivity Commission released a 30-page detailed report entitled Increasing Australia's Future Prosperity. And in all the 30 pages, which went through all sorts of stuff, had data, charts, all that sort of thing, it didn't once mention skilled migration, immigration, population growth or anything, which shows you how much the Productivity Commission values it. Like, surely if it's going to be a key driver of prosperity, you think the Productivity Commission would mention it, wouldn't it? So then we get to the second argument. We need to bring in a whole bunch of, we need to run mass immigration because they're more productive and it boosts living standards. Well, the actual data, the Productivity Commission's latest migrant intake report had this great set of slides, which you can see. Might be a little bit hard to read, but the gist of it is that the overall immigration intake actually performs worse. They have lower median income, they have lower labour force participation and higher unemployment than the domestic population, which kind of puts, demolishes the argument. In fact, the only cohort of the immigration intake that has roughly the same but marginally better is the primary skilled visas, but the secondary skilled visas are worse. So, and every other category is worse. So, but if you take it as the immigration intake as a whole, they actually perform worse than the domestic population. The other thing that's misleading is they always compare the skilled migrants against the overall domestic population, which gives a bit of, it's not comparing like for like, it's comparing apples with oranges. Now, Bob Birrell, who's here, did a fantastic paper in 2013 which compared like for like. So compared recent immigrant graduates versus the domestic born graduates, and it showed that the immigrant graduates had much worse outcomes, labour market outcomes, than domestic graduates. So according to this study, about 70% of Australian graduates aged 20 to 34 had managerial or professional work, and only 9.5% were not employed. Whereas non-English speaking background migrants represented about 80% of the arrivals, and 31% of them had who arrived over the same period had managerial or professional work, and 31% were not employed. So the outcomes are actually worse when you compare like for like. What about skills shortages? Well, it's not really an issue. The Australian Department of Employment releases a skills shortages report about once every 6 months. And the latest report and all the previous ones since, well, basically the last 5 years or since the commodity market crashed, it said that Australia's skills shortage remains low by historical standards. So basically we've got a solution in search of a problem. And there's also, you've probably read in the newspapers and that kind of thing, there's also growing concern about the rise of artificial intelligence and robots, which are going to take all our jobs. Now, this is quite interesting. Last year, the Committee of Economic Development Australia released a report warning that 40% of Aussie jobs could be replaced by technology by 2025. And then, contradictorily, it released its immigration report about a month ago, which argued for a big increase in immigration. Now, I don't know about you, but I see that as a pretty massive contradiction. And there's also the argument, this one's based more on logic than anything else, but that if you run a mass immigration program to plug skills shortages, you're going to create shortages elsewhere. Now let's just consider this, let's think this through for a second. Let's say we've got some perceived shortages in the construction industry. So you're getting 100,000 people to work in construction. Well, those 100,000 people can demand other things, so hairdressing and whatever else, and that's going to create shortages in those areas. So then the solution is to then bring in more people to plug up those areas, but then that creates shortages in construction. You can see where I'm going here. Dog eat tail. So the solution to all this is to obviously better use your existing resources. And Australia's labour underutilisation at the moment is about 14%. So we do have significant existing resources that could be deployed if only there was a will, and if only employers were prepared to, train and hire locals like they used to. So what about this whole argument about we need mass immigration to solve population ageing? We're getting old, and this is going to create all these problems. There's a bit of a problem with this argument. Immigrants grow old. So I've included 3 quotes there, which you can read at your leisure. This presentation will be available online. But basically, these all come from the Productivity Commission. Now, I could have probably put 100 in there because the Productivity Commission's made this point so many times that immigration gives you a very temporary fix, because you bring in a whole bunch of young people that boosts your worker share, gives you a sliding boost to your population pyramid, improves that, but then they get old, and it's only a transitory fix. It doesn't work long term. It's kicking the can down the road. In any event, if population ageing was an issue, then why is the government about to ramp up immigration through these parental visas? I've got no idea why. So from the 1st of July next year, they're going to basically allow an estimated, and this is an estimate that came out from some academics the other day, 10 to 30,000 people per year to come in, and as elderly parents of migrants that are already here. Now there's some providers, they'll have to have private health insurance, but which will push up our premiums because they're old, and they're going to use more hospital cover, that kind of thing. But of course, they're not going to work, pay tax, blah blah blah. But they're going to add strain to existing public services, infrastructure, housing, etc., etc. And it's going to invert our population pyramid, make it worse, and mean they're going to have more elderly people to support other things equal. And this is an important point. The economic modelling, we always hear, economic modelling, if we increase immigration, we're going to have this much more wealth, blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't, if you actually read into these models, it doesn't actually support that view. Now, the Productivity Commission a few months back released its migrant intake report, which did say that did model the impact on GDP per capita between historical rates of population, whereby the population hits 40 million by 2060, versus zero net overseas migration, which means that the population stabilises about 27 million by 2060. That's the first chart you saw. So they effectively modelled a 13 million increase through immigration versus a zero increase through net overseas migration. And this is the figure that was quoted by all the boosters. The Productivity Commission did find that GDP per capita would be 7% higher in 2014 dollars in real terms by 2016 versus zero net overseas migration. Sounds great, doesn't it? You know, and this is what everyone used. See, we've got to have this. We've got to have this. It's awesome. Problem is, the PC said this, that the gains are transitory and come from a higher improvement in the work at a population ratio, the stuff I just talked about. And there is a downside to this. They found that labour productivity would actually be reduced and real wages would fall by doing this. So we've got this perverse situation where high immigration improves per capita GDP by 2060 by boosting the proportion of workers, but that this comes at the expense of lower labour productivity and lower real wages. It gets even worse though, because again, getting back to this kicking the can down the road ageing situation, beyond the forecast period, the migrants will age, they'll retire, they'll drag down future growth. So it boosts growth in the short term, but then you have this payback down the track. This is what's called Ponzi demography. Now the distribution of this $7,000 also matters. There's no point running a high immigration program if it makes existing incumbent residents worse off, I would have thought. Now this modelling, the PC didn't look at distribution, but it did do a huge report in 2006, which was actually called, I think, the economic impacts of immigration, and that did model distribution. And it found that if Australia boosted its skilled migration intake by 50% over 20 years from 2005 to 2015, it would actually lower the incomes of incumbent workers, while wealthy capital owners, so the 1%ers, and the migrants themselves reap the rewards. Now, I don't know about you, but making incumbent workers worse off does not sound like a great argument for running a mass immigration program. And we've got some other considerations that we need to consider. Now, the first one's one that Dick Smith has made on multiple occasions, is that if you run a high immigration program, you're going to dilute Australia's fixed mineral endowment. Now, whether you like it or not, it's pretty much the thing that Australia's good at, is digging up dirt and selling overseas. And that's effectively what gives us, to a large degree, our high living standards. Now, if you double the population, you're obviously reducing everyone's endowment by about 50%. Other things equal. And just as I put these two charts here just as a bit of something to think about. Melbourne and Sydney have derived the lion's share of the population growth of the past 12 years. And it's interesting that both New South Wales and Victoria, which is a proxy for Melbourne and Sydney, there isn't capital city data on this, have had very little boost in exports over that period. We've had a massive blowout in imports and a huge increase in the trade deficit. Now, what this tells me is we're bringing a whole bunch of people, but they're not working in particularly productive jobs and not working in export type jobs. Yet those same people are buying imported cars, they're buying TVs, they're buying consumer items, and that's blowing out the trade deficit. Doesn't sound too smart. So, why does the government persist with high immigration? Well, I put it down to two main reasons. The first one, and this gets down to that GDP versus GDP per capita thing I showed earlier. It gives the illusion of growth and sound economic management. If you import 1.5 to 2%, well, if you grow the population 1.5 to 2% per year, every year, it actually makes it pretty hard to have a technical recession, because the economy's got to go backwards by more than that to actually register a recession. It makes them look really good, even if we're going backwards on a per person basis. It also has the support of an unholy alliance. The first is the growth lobby. This is the most powerful. We're talking about all these sorts of 1%er guys who make a mozza from high population growth. All the people with market power, got the ears of government. They love it. It's an easy, lazy way to grow. Dick Smith used to make this comment. He said, back when I was a capitalist, it was fantastic for me. High population growth was great. I could increase sales every year, do nothing, and get richer. You effectively privatise the gains and you socialise the losses, because we all bear the costs. The other one's is a stranger phenomenon, and this is what I call the globalists. And these are the people who believe in open borders, free movement of people, and they don't believe in the nation state. And this has supporters on the left and right. And And these people don't believe that if you bring a whole bunch of people in, it's going to damage your environment, because they look at the environment from a top-down level. They say, well, there's no difference if Australia's got another 20 million people, or if if you take 20 million from somewhere else. And they use this with climate change. Now, both groups, and this is absolutely critical, both groups often label opponents of mass immigration racist or xenophobic to basically shut down the debate. Now, we've all seen this. You know, I've been called all names under the sun when I try and make rational things. So how do we win the debate? Well, first of all, and we do this on macrobusiness.com.au all the time, we pretty much do this every day, you've got to continually challenge the flawed economic arguments. So every time someone, you know, Jessica Irvine comes out with open borders is awesome, you know, we've got to do this, it's going to do this, it's the right thing to do, and you've got to challenge it. Push back every single time. And that's basically what I do. I'm like a dog with a bone, I just don't stop. And this is what Sustainable Australia does on their Facebook page. You just got to constantly push back. Second, and more importantly, and I believe this is the absolute key, you've got to focus on the lived experience of mass immigration. It's all good for the so-called experts to tell us, increase immigration, you get this boost to per capita GDP in 2050. People don't care. People understand, because we live it every day. We understand that congestion is getting worse. We've got reduced amenity. We've got lower quality and more expensive housing. They see the environment, or at least they're concerned about the environment getting degraded. You've got to focus on that stuff. So every time a newspaper article comes out there was one yesterday, I think it was, on Sydney's trains being overloaded. You got to push it out there, and you've got to draw the link, because it's not rocket science why this is happening, but the articles never do it. They go, it's just come out of nowhere. It's, phantom demand. It's like, gee, you didn't think that, that 100,000 people per year in Melbourne's case a million people in 10 years is going to have an impact on congestion? Really? And this is also extremely important. The other key is to never ever make arguments about race, and stick to the numbers, because congestion doesn't matter what colour your skin is. The fact of the matter is, a person's a person. If they're driving a car, if an extra person comes in, they're driving a car, it creates congestion just as much as someone else. Doesn't matter where they're from. And if you focus on the numbers, you focus on the economics, just use rational arguments, we will end up winning the debate. We already are starting to win the debate. Now, I just thought I'd give a bit of a hat tip to Sustainable Australia's policy, which is to reduce net overseas migration to about 70,000 a year, which was sort of the long run average before we went nuts. Makes sense, although we might need to change the population target, because I think this might have been written a few years ago, and we've obviously grown a lot since then. So the longer we wait to do this, the bigger the ultimate population will be. But it's a sound target. And I'm a strong believer that we actually need a national debate and strategy and population policy. So we've all been talked down by the elites, by the globalists, etc. That this is what we're doing. We're never saying it. Nobody's actually asked us, the Australian people, is this what we want? Do we want Australia to go to 40 million by 2055? Do we want to ultimately end up at 70 million? We need to pressure the government and policymakers to actually ask us what we want. And the Productivity Commission made the same recommendations in its latest report. Said they've got to focus on the well-being of incumbent residents. They've got to do consultation. They didn't mention a plebiscite, but I personally think a plebiscite on population is the way to go. We've got plebiscites, people pushing plebiscites on all these other issues. I'm not saying they're not important, but this is fundamental to the environment, to living standards. It affects all of us. That's it. Now I'll put questions here. I might save questions for the Q&A, but again, I write on these issues almost every day now. I'll probably put up 2 on Monday, maybe 3. I've got a whole... so if you want to read this stuff, go to macrobusiness.com.au. I hope this is informative, and this slideshow and also the presentation will be online at a later date. So hopefully you can get something out of it. Thank you.
So we'll save our questions till the end, but definitely want to now invite the Honourable Kelvin Thomson up to say a few words. Kelvin is obviously well known to many of us, former Australian politician, federal politician from 1996 until just earlier this year when he retired, a member of the Australian Labor Party for the division of wills. Was also in state parliament as well and local, so he's been right through the graduation process and came out at the end, went out on his own terms, and is now, he tells me, planning his trip around Australia, which I don't think he'll be talking about that today, but we're certainly looking forward to hearing Kelvin talk around an economically sustainable Australia and touching on some trade issues. So please welcome Kelvin Thomson.
Thanks, Will, and it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to appear with Leith, who I'm a great admirer of his work. He's been doing terrific things for a long time now. I should also do a shout out to Bob Birrell and tell him that I've ascertained that we're having lunch on Monday, Bob, so you don't need to ask that on the Q&A as to when that will be. I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about intergenerational equity over the course of the past couple of years, and I want to advance the proposition that we have an obligation to future generations to hand on a country and a planet in as good a condition as the one that was given to us, and that we are failing to honour that obligation. And in particular, in relation to intergenerational equity, that young people are doing it harder than people of my generation. I've talked about an axis of financial evil, which is housing unaffordability, job insecurity and student debt. And when I attended class reunions with my old schoolmates and asked them what became of them, they were able to drop out of university and walk into jobs within 48 hours and make a career out of those jobs, and I was able to put down a deposit and take out a loan at age 25 and buy a house, and my kids are a number of years past that, and they are frankly a long way off having the same kind of opportunity. And I hear this amongst my colleagues, and I see it going on right throughout the society, that young people do not have the same opportunities that my generation has enjoyed. And I also think that with older people that we are letting them down as well, and that this fear of an ageing society has been used to diminish the circumstances of older people, both in terms of cutting back on their concessions and the like, and also devaluing them with this idea that older people are a burden to society and it's all the rest of us holding them up. I think this is absolutely untrue. That I see Kathy Betts is here, and she's done work about the issue of population ageing and workforce ageing. Workforce ageing is happening, but left to its own devices, it would reduce unemployment, which is unambiguously a good thing. And it's also worth noting that those societies which are demographically older are universally healthier and wealthier and better societies to live in than societies which are demographically younger, which tend to be sicker and have a lower life expectancy. So my message about population ageing is don't worry, be happy. The second thing that I want to challenge under the general idea of intergenerational equity is that things are getting better. And this rosy view, you'll hear it from the Prime Minister, you know, we live in exciting times, or Joe Hockey, our best days are ahead of us, and so on. Now, this in my view is spin. The world is not a safer place than it used to be. It is a less safe place. You know, when I was a kid, I used to walk to school. I think there was only ever one attempt to abduct me. But Now, you don't do it. You don't let your kids walk to school. And in terms of whether our society or others in Europe and the US and other places are safer societies, they are not. And in terms of economic opportunity, you see the gap between rich and poor widening. You see job insecurity, you see unemployment, you see underemployment, you see casualisation of the workforce, and you also see the social problems, drugs, crime, mental health issues, homelessness, domestic violence, all of these things are showing an increase. So I absolutely contest the idea that things are getting better and the world is becoming a better place. Now, what are the things that have caused this? I think there are really two significant drivers of it. One is globalisation and the triumph of free market liberalism. So you have globalisation, privatisation, deregulation, free movement of goods, free movement of people, all of that basket of positions that are referred to as free market liberalism that have triumphed. And I think if you look at whether these things have helped or assisted us, I think in many respects they have not. And in relation to Australia, we were the beneficiaries of what was referred to as the Australian settlement, where Australia certainly had tariff walls, but the quid pro quo for employers was that they had to pay their workers a decent wage. And we were the land of the harvester judgment, the introduction of the world's first minimum wage, and that was exactly based around the idea of how much an employer had to pay in order to be eligible for the tariff protection which they enjoyed. And as a consequence of the Australian settlement, we were essentially, for many years through the previous century, a workers' paradise. Now, much of that Australian settlement was demolished in the 1980s by the party to which I belong. But I think if you look at what has happened since that time, you will see that a lot of job insecurity and difficulties and hardship have arisen as a consequence of it. The other thing that I think has been a driver of making our social conditions and our living standards worse has been rapid population growth. Most of you know that for most of the world's history, we bumped along at less than 1 billion people, and we only got to 2 billion people within the lifetime of some people who are still alive. But in the course of the last century, we've skyrocketed from 2 billion people to 7 billion people. We're tracking for 9 or 10 billion people by mid-century, with no sign of it tapering off. I might say that for years demographers have said, yes, the population's been rising dramatically, but in a couple of decades it'll taper off and level out, or even go backwards. You'll hear George Pell or others refer to this, but it never happens. And each successive estimate shows higher levels of population and population growth than the one before it. So for Africa, it is increasing at the rate of 80 million people a year. And the consequences of that in terms of conflict over access to scarce resources, poverty, boat people, terrorism, all of those things are fundamentally being driven by the extra 80 million people every year. For Australia, as Leith has been eloquently describing, from about 2003-2004, we had a dramatic uptick in our immigration, where we're around 2004 we were net 100,000. Then in short order we got to over 200,000, and we've been basically at that level ever since. And as a consequence, we have been increasing at the rate of an extra million people every 3 years. And this is part of what I referred to a number of years ago when I outlined what I called the witches' hats theory of government. And I said, well, You know, witches' hats are those plastic or rubber orange cones that you've got to navigate your way through, and part of the advanced driver courses, in order to get your advanced driver qualification, you've got to be able to get through without knocking over the hats. And if you think of a public policy task like housing or education or transport or environment protection as a witch's hat, it's a bit like that for governments. And the slower you're driving, the less likely it is you'll knock over the hats, but if you're driving too fast, it's likely that you'll knock over more hats and won't get your qualification. And similarly, for governments in rapidly growing populations, it makes it harder for them to solve social problems, and therefore they lose support of the electorate. And in recent years, I think we've seen evidence of this with unprecedented numbers of one-term governments in Victoria and in Queensland, and people being increasingly dissatisfied with their political leaders. It's been noted at the last federal election, the number of people not supporting the major parties is at its highest level ever, and you can add the Greens into that and you still get that outcome. People who are not voting Labor or Liberal or National or Green, reflecting that level of dissatisfaction. So they might vote for Clive Palmer and then lose confidence in him, but they'll gravitate to Nick Xenophon or Pauline Hanson or somebody else, and if they fall by the wayside, they may gravitate to somebody else, because essentially they are not satisfied with the political leadership they're being given. Now, I know that in recent times media and political and business elite have been running around like headless chooks over the result in relation to Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, going, you know, who knew? Why weren't we told? How could this have come to pass? Now, I know that victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan, but I will go back to something that I said back in 2011, where I quoted the US environmentalist Frosty Wooldridge, who talked about California, and he said it was once the most beautiful state in the Union. In 1950, it housed a reasonable 10 million people, known as the land of milk and honey. California's mountains, coastline and weather beckoned. Californian condors soared through limitless blue skies. Yosemite National Park, giant sequoia redwoods, whales and seals along its coastline. Hollywood and 77 Sunset Strip created the Californian mystique. 60 years later, 38 million people cram, jam, gridlock and fume in their fumes on forever crowded freeways, growing at 1,700 people daily and over 600,000 annually. California expects an added 21 million people within 35 years. The result is massive subdivision, housing sprawl, roads, malls, schools, churches and homes devour land like Kansas wheat combines. Developers demolish nature, they guzzle water, they vomit black smoke into the air, cars whiz around like mad hornets. The more complicated the traffic, the more drivers suffer road rage. Few smiling faces can be seen on Californian freeways, drivers busy themselves trying to stay alive. And I said, the political result was that California seems on its way to becoming ungovernable. A Democratic governor, Gray Davis, was recalled by the voters in a special election, in part due to anger over his support for California granting driver's licences to illegal entrants. Arnold Schwarzenegger managed to disappoint pretty much everyone, supporters included, during his tenure. Governor Jerry Brown has been unable to bridge the budget gap and a sharp partisan divide. That sharp partisan divide is an increasing feature of and blot on United States politics, dragging the whole country down and making it nigh on ungovernable. So people will say, who knew? But if you can see the forces which are at work and you don't do anything about those things, then you really do leave the way open for populist demagogues. Now, what can we do about all this? It seems to me that we need to take the migration level back to where it was pre-2015 4. I've talked about the net 70,000, but I also agree with the point that Leith made that the longer we leave this, the more pressing this becomes, and you may have to revise the 70,000 downwards in order to achieve more reasonable and acceptable outcomes. We should be focusing and supporting manufacturing industry. We need to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. That is a sustainable world of the future, where countries and communities are self-sufficient and self-reliant. We need to support and promote skills and proper training. It is a disgrace the way that TAFE has been wound back, and these private training colleges with all their shonks and rauders in there ripping off students and ripping off the public purse at the same time. So we need to have a focus on training. And I think we also need to try and get away from some of the identity politics which has been bedeviling political discourse, and focus on things that unite us rather than things that divide us. So the universal provision of health, universal provision of education, universal provision of pensions, things like that can help bring people together rather than divide them and breed resentment. So thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon, and I'm happy to respond to questions. Thanks, Will. Trade's very important for Australia and is important for other countries as well, but an unfortunate feature of some of our trade agreements have been that they have been disadvantageous to Australian manufacturing. So we enter into a trade deal with Thailand, the consequences of which are that we export basically 0 cars to Thailand and import so many cars from Thailand that you see the end results with Ford and Toyota and Holden deciding to shut up shop, and we lose the manufacturing industry from Australia. I think that is very unfortunate, because things like the automotive industry, you have engineering and research and development and other things that hang off those industries, and in terms of self-sufficiency, we need to have them. One of the other things that's really important to understand about trade agreements is that increasingly they haven't been about tariffs and quotas at all. Australia no longer has tariffs and quotas of any consequence to trade, so the things that we give up essentially relate to giving up sovereignty. We say that we agree that we will not put in any rules in relation to migration around labour market testing, for example. And I have felt very strongly with the temporary migrant worker programs that we need to have labour market testing to make sure that Australians who are capable of doing these jobs and who want to do these jobs are given the opportunity to do these jobs. But regrettably, in the China Free Trade Deal and the Korea Free Trade Deal, you've got labour market testing provisions which basically outlaw future Australian governments from engaging in labour market testing. So that is why I've been concerned about those agreements. And the other part of the trade deals that I've been very concerned about is what's called the investor-state dispute settlement provisions, which enable corporations who have been disadvantaged by Australian public policy positions to take us to court and to sue us. So this is clearly a thing which enhances corporate power at the expense of people's power and the power of democratically elected governments to act in our interest. And the classic example was the Philip Morris case, where the Australian government decided to enforce plain paper packaging on tobacco products as a health measure, and Philip Morris got itself incorporated in Hong Kong so it could sue us for doing that, and arguing that they were suffering a disadvantage as a result. Potentially these things can be used where state governments block fracking or exploration for coal seam gas. All sorts of environmental issues and so on come up. So I think the investor-state dispute settlement provisions are very bad, and we should not agree to any trade deals that contain them. Can I add something on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add that I, in a former life, I worked as the Australian Treasury's trade representative back in 2003, 2004. And that was during the negotiation of the Thailand-Australia Free Trade Agreement, the US-Australia Free Trade Agreement. And I'll just tell you from the outset that Treasury actually hates free trade agreements, well they did back then. And the Productivity Commission hates free trade agreements. These are purely political documents that have been pushed by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And the Treasury's and the Productivity Commission's concerns rolled around a bunch of things. First of all, these trade agreements actually reduce efficiency. Now, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, every single free trade agreement that we sign has something called rules of origin in it. So what it means is you've got to go through a complicated administrative task to prove that your good that you're selling to Thailand or whoever is actually made in Australia. So you've got to prove that you use at least 50% of this and whatever, and you've sourced your inputs from here and all this kind of thing. And the Productivity Commission estimated that adds about 5% to your costs. On top of that, it also creates something called trade diversion. Now this might sound wonky, but if you're buying cars, let's say with the US Free Trade Agreement, the US is not the world's most efficient car maker. We buy most of the cars from, say, Japan or Germany or whatever. But because we've got a free trade agreement with the US, we don't pay a tariff with them, so we switch purchases from these other nations to the US, and effectively we lose the 10% tariff, but we don't get a 10% reduction in our cost. So that's actually destroys welfare. But on top of that, you have obviously the investor-state dispute settlement. We've extended copyright and patents under the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement, and we're going to do it under the TPP, and that adds cost to consumers. Then we've got the foreign worker issue, which Kelvin went on discussed, and the biggest issue, we've got absolutely no due process. There's no mechanism in place for an independent body like the Productivity Commission to review the trade deals before they get put into place. And all the academic research that's been done over the US-Australia Free Trade Agreement and our other deals have shown that they've actually been damaging economically despite all the garbage that was sold.
And tell us about how you think the housing sector is balancing or impacting on the overall Australian economy going forward as well. You can make a comment about that gentleman's question.
Look, unfortunately, my colleague in macro business, David William-Smith, his nickname is, well, his avatar is houses and holes. And he did that in about 2010 because he came up with it because that is the Australian economy, or it was back then. We dig up dirt, we sell it, and we leverage the proceeds into housing, and we speculate on housing. And that's what's driving the economy at the moment, not particularly sustainable. I said to him about last week that maybe he should change the name just to houses, because that's all we've got left. The commodity boom's done and dusted. Perth's bleeding, Darwin's about to bleed, Queensland's been under the pump. Basically, the labour market, the overall economy has been driven by the two parasitic cities of Sydney and Melbourne, whose whole economy is based on sucking people in, building houses for them, selling coffees to them, services basically. Selling citizenship through degrees, all that kind of thing. It's not particularly sustainable. And I've been wrong for about 3 years in this, because I thought this was going to happen 3 years ago. But anyway, as soon as the apartment dwelling construction boom rolls over, and I thought it was going to roll over this year, but it just keeps getting kicked down the road. Now, according to the approvals data, it looks like it's probably going to be late next year, if not early 2018. But once it stops growing, once you stop building more each year, your employment doesn't rise anymore. And once it starts falling, so you've got to basically have growth. You got to build more than you did last year for employment to keep rising. As soon as it tapers, you get no more employment growth, and as soon as the apartment construction starts to fall, well, then you're going to get job losses. And this is creating a serious problem, particularly for Melbourne, in that it's pretty much all we've got left here. And once the apartment construction boom starts to roll over next year, I think we're in a lot of trouble, because obviously the Ford's already gone, Toyota's about to go, so manufacturing's dead. Housing's all we've got left. And I'm not sure that answers your question, but hence the property lobby continually asks for more and more people, because if you bring more and more people, it gives you an excuse to build more and more homes. It lines their pockets. You might remember Harry Triggerboff about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, said that he wants an Australia of 100 million people because they're not going to build apartments for them. We need to bulldoze over the state parks. It'd be fantastic. We can have a fantastic economy. It'd be magical. I couldn't think of anything worse, quite frankly. But that gives you a sense of what they're about. It's about the 1%ers lining their own pockets, socialising the costs.
Well, that I think we'll wrap up the questions there, and we've been going over time all day, so apologies for that, and thank you for your patience. Obviously, thank you very much to our guest speakers, Kelvin Thomson and Leith van Onselen. We hope to continue to work with you both and continue to push the cause of sustainability and a sustainable Australia, obviously, and of course the population issue, which is very, very important to that. Can I just mention one thing, and I'm going to ask our Vice President Brad Harris to come up for a couple of minutes and also thank our speakers and talk about one thing you can do to help us, because we've got a launch of something and some flyers to help out with. So I'll just introduce Brad Harris for a couple of minutes.
I'll be very brief in finishing up, just a couple of quick things. As the guys have said, if you're listening to this and you're trying to work out how can I help, by all means keep plugging away at the media, your local community groups and other avenues with the message. Politically, we're trying to do our bit. We've obviously got a federal party. We've just established the ACT party. We're looking to establish the Victorian party to contest the 2018 state elections. That'll be happening over the next 6 months. We need your help to establish the Vic State Party. How you can help, we need to get a quorum of members in the state. We're not quite there, so if you're not a member, please consider joining up to get us to that level where we can register. If you are a member, please, if you've got a wife or a husband or a child or a mother and father who might consider joining, that will help us get across the line, and we can then push that barrow in the state election and keep pushing the message politically. Separate from the membership thing, there's also some flyers up the back, so feel free to take a pile and letterbox them in your area to help us continue to push the brand and the message locally in Melbourne and Victoria. I think we need to thank our two great guest speakers, Kelvin and Leith. You've both been fantastic. We've got a very humble bottle of wine for you both. Is
that a Grange?
Take that home and enjoy it with our thanks. So once again, if we can thank these two gents.